This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
City Council will vote tomorrow on Mayor Sherrell Parker's plan to borrow $800 million to create and preserve housing in the city. This is one of her biggest priorities for Philly right now. In this week's Politics episode, we're going to focus on Parker's comprehensive housing plan, the challenges of preserving homes and building new ones, and how to fund it all. It's Wednesday, June 11th. I'm Trinae Nuri, and we're talking politics. All right, so this week I'm talking politics with CityCast Philly executive producer Matt Katz. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Trinae, let's get into it.
Matt, you and I have been trying to get our heads around this big issue in City Hall right now, and that's housing. The mayor has this ambitious housing plan, a $2 billion plan to preserve existing homes and create new ones. So over the last few weeks, we've been reading about it and talking about it, and now part of that big plan is to borrow $800 million. This is coming up for a big vote in City Council tomorrow, Thursday. So we kind of wanted to do a show catching people up.
Yeah, and this is a really big deal for Mayor Sherrell Parker. It is her signature policy initiative of her entire term in office. And it appears she has the support of most of City Council, more or less, on this proposal. But the issue is really complicated if you don't understand the ins and outs of zoning policy and housing policy in the city. Fortunately, you did this interview recently with one of the smartest minds when it comes to housing. John Geeting is the engagement director at the Political Action Committee Philly 3.0. He's been writing articles in the Philadelphia Citizen about the potential benefits and shortfalls of the plan, and we've been reading that and trying to catch up on all of this.
Yeah, so let's play a little bit of what he told me.
Overall, it's really good that we have city leadership that is focused on building more housing in the city, preserving more affordable housing, helping people afford to stay in the homes that they're in. And, it's a very ambitious agenda. There are over 75 different programs mentioned in the plan that, the administration wants to invest in. And then there are a lot of legislative and regulatory ideas for how to make things move faster, more predictably. So I think the city's trying to figure out how do we raise funds to help people preserve their homes, replace HVAC and boilers, because Philadelphia has a lot of low income homeowners. That we're kind of a special case, unlike a lot of other cities like that. And there's a lot of households in the city that, one big maintenance bill, one big, repair bill that comes as a surprise, could lead to someone having to sell their house and end up in a more precarious housing situation.
So yeah, the mayor wants to cut the red tape, and she wants to fix old homes where residents really can't afford these major home renovations. And she just wants to get more housing in a city that needs housing. Here's some of the stats that John talked to me about just how dire the housing situation is in the Commonwealth and in Philly.
So Pennsylvania overall has about 130,000 unit housing shortage. Philadelphia is the biggest city in Pennsylvania, and we're not immune from that. Just in the Southeast, though, is almost 100,000 of that 130,000 unit housing shortage. And so the number of homes on the market for sale has decreased about 60% between 2017 and 2023. And housing costs rose by about 55%, almost the same amount in that time. So there is a big supply and demand mismatch.
That is just crazy, those numbers that John told you. There's just not enough homes. And because of that, costs are getting more and more out of control for people who want to buy, for people who want to rent, for people in the middle of the economic spectrum, and certainly for those in the lower end of it. So that really brings us to tomorrow's big vote in City Council.
And we'll get into that after the break.
This episode is brought to you by Temptations Cat Treats. Your cat will come running for the perfectly irresistible Temptations Creamy Puree and Temptations Lickable Spoon Cat Treats. The best time to feed lickable cat treats to your cat is anytime. Feed by hand for a playful moment, in a bowl for a creamy treat, or as a topper to make mealtime fun. Visit temptationstreats.com to learn more.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
So we need money to fix this housing shortage, and that's what the vote tomorrow is on. City Council is expected to vote to borrow $800 million as part of Mayor Parker's overall $2 billion plan.
So much money.
This $800 million is in bonds, which start us off in preserving or creating 30,000 units of housing.
So much housing.
So the whole plan is called the Housing Opportunities Made Easy Initiative, or everyone's calling it HOME. So there were a lot of late night negotiations between City Council and the mayor, but City Council gave preliminary approval to borrow that $800 million. And it's all tied up with the end of this fiscal year vote on the budget as well tomorrow. But City Council didn't just want to hand the mayor this housing money, right? Mm-hmm. That's why last week they decided to give themselves some oversight over all of it.
Yeah, and this money is largely going to programs that currently exist that support the affordable housing supply in the city. So there was not like argument in council, it seems, over the details of where the money was going. It was more like they wanted to know about any big expenditures. So the last minute, they added this provision to the $800 million agreement that gives council some oversight here. There's going to be a project review team made up of 2 mayoral appointees and 2 council appointees, and they'll have to approve some of the smaller changes to how the money is spent, if there are changes, and bigger changes will have to go to city council for legislative approval. And then council members also, as part of this negotiated deal, they'll get updates 4 times a year on how the money was spent in their districts. And now that that's said, we expect City Council tomorrow to vote to give the final green light to this part of the HOME initiative.
I think it's also important to add that I think maybe like the reason for this oversight is because all of the federal funding cuts is kind of like that overcast, that dark cloud following like a lot of major cities. And we're like trying to figure out, well, pandemic money is gone. So like, are we able to kind of do all this? You know, not everyone is on board. At-large council member Isaiah Thomas said he fundamentally disagrees with the city issuing $800 million in bonds to support Parker's housing plan.
But it's still expected to pass.
Right. Okay. I live in a row home, and it's enough room for me and my family. You also live in a row home, Matt?
I mean, it's the best way to live in a city. You know, close to my neighbors, but I never hear them through the walls. These are homes built over 100 years ago. They're well built, got that brick facade. And row homes in general, they create enough density on the street so there's enough people walking on the street that you feel safe and you know your neighbors, but you know, it's not too dense, like you still hear the birds. And Philly is known for these row homes. We have the highest concentration of row houses in the country, and it's most of our housing stock. They're iconic, these row homes.
Yeah, the aesthetic of that classic brick row home is kind of what you're referring to. Mm-hmm. I would say over the last like decade or so, we've definitely seen the quote unquote new row homes, which have more of that like slate color look, sleek, modern. But,
Yeah.
not every Philadelphian needs, a 3 or 4 bedroom home
Yeah.
with a basement or like a rooftop deck.
3,500 square feet. Not everybody needs all that. Right.
Right. They need something that maybe fits more of their lifestyle, maybe a 1 bedroom, right? I recently did some reporting over in Northern Liberties covering a story, and
Yeah.
I felt like an ant. I felt so tiny compared to these massive apartment buildings that they kind of just like squeezed and stuffed in like every little nook and cranny down there. I don't know. I don't know if that's how other people feel, but I felt so small compared to these giant developments. But I wonder, what the new housing that's going to be created by this plan is going to look like. I talked to John about the mix of housing options in the city.
Sometimes people are like, why are we building all these 1 bedrooms? Like, we need family housing and that's true. But like Philly demographics have also been shifting to more like 1-person and 2-person households where, things happen. People might have been, living with their folks after college, but then like, they want to move out, or people get divorced, and suddenly one family needs 2 locations.
But there are major obstacles when it comes to creating a variety of homes or even building homes in general, right? I mean, John told us this wild story from Fishtown, where he used to run the neighborhood association, about how local neighborhood groups tried to stop a church from being converted into housing.
In my neighborhood in Fishtown, there was a church, St. Laurentius, that the Catholic Church had decided to like deconsecrate the property. They no longer wanted to use it for, religious purposes. And it was like falling apart. It had all these problems and got historically designated, which adds like a whole other set of rules around it. And some people in the neighborhood who had more of like a mission-driven purpose in mind to like just like save this cool old building, came up with a plan to try to turn it into apartments instead. And what happened was that, some neighbors, like, I think some kind of came to it earnestly, like it wanted this to stay a religious site or like a community site. I think other people were concerned about things like parking and, it's in a very tightly packed, row house neighborhood setting. And they sued and tried to block, zoning permission to turn it into apartments. And this went on for years and years. They just kept appealing, losing, until eventually that group couldn't afford it anymore, had to sell it, was bought by some new buyers who ended up tearing it down. And now it's just like an empty lot and where this beautiful church used to be. And, that's maybe not the typical case, but like a lot of housing has to go through this very kind of combative process in order to get anything built. And it's a shame when like, it's extended not just to like new buildings, but like also like the reuse of buildings that maybe even community landmarks that people would love to see stick around, but, have to answer for all these kinds of local objections that couldn't possibly satisfy sometimes and still like afford to do the project.
Wow. So like, sometimes building new homes can bring a lot of conflict, or just like, sometimes you have to go through such a contentious process.
And then the squeaky wheel, like there's a group of neighbors who don't want a thing, they can get in the ear of a council member, and a council member has, in this city, broad power to like kill any sort of housing project. So for those who don't know, in Philly, council members have this councilmatic prerogative. By the way, it's councilmatic, not councilmatic. I just learned that. So councilmatic prerogative is this thing where council members can, if it's in their district, they have this broad power to use legislation to kill a project. John talked about that as well.
I also think it's like city councils got this really intense district system, councilman prerogative. The district members all defer to one another on like land use issues in their district. So you end up with these like 10 mini mayors that kind of have like absolute like SimCity kind of authority over what goes on in their district. And it's just kind of like a recipe for sclerosis. Like people, there's so many rules. Like you mentioned row houses, the number one, Philadelphia home type. City council's made it so that there's actually 10 different sets of rules, physical dimensions, lot sizes, and things like that to build a simple row house. It's not even the case that like the rules to build a row house are the same across the city anymore.
I mean, I think the argument here too is, when neighborhood groups push back, it's also to kind of like maybe possibly combat gentrification in a district. So I have so many lingering questions on which districts in the city will be the winners and losers in this housing deal. What benefits are there to have more or less development in your district? And, really curious, like also we're talking about housing. I also want to know like the impacts of rent because not everyone is a homeowner.
No. Well, the idea is that if there's more housing stock, then it could theoretically control the cost of rent. So, it's all sort of tied up in this big mix. And the idea, according to the mayor, is you build more housing, more affordable housing, and that theoretically will help the whole city. My question is like whether we're going to be able to build this housing like fast. I mean, she's talking about 30-something thousand units of new and then rehabilitated housing stock. But I mean, if that takes 30 years, I mean, that's not going to have that much of an impact. So now that council is going to authorize the money, will city council continue to have the same sort of veto power over what housing gets built in the district? Will they still have the power to slow things down like they have in the past? The legislation that's expected to pass tomorrow does fast track 1,000 parcels of city-owned land for development. So these properties would be able to be sold without city council passing a bill on each property. Theoretically, that will speed up the construction of housing. So we'll see.
All right, well, we'll follow all of this and that city council vote. And to find out how things go down, tune into our Friday News Roundup on Friday. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Janae. And thanks to John Geeting for walking us through this stuff.
That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed this episode about Mayor Parker's housing plan and how to fund it, share this with a friend. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.